I'll never forget the look on Tyler's face when he said those words to me in my own kitchen. That cold, calculating look that made him seem like a stranger wearing my grandson's skin. "You're too old for that money, Graham," he said so casually you'd think he was commenting on the weather. And in that moment, everything I thought I knew about love and family just shattered. The boy I'd rocked to sleep, the child I'd raised more than his own parents had, was standing there with his girlfriend eyeing my silverware like it was inventory, telling me I didn't need my own money because I wasn't going to live forever. I felt something inside me crack open. Not anger, not yet, just a deep hollow ache that started in my chest and spread through my whole body until I could barely breathe. Let me start at the beginning, dear listener, because you need to understand how I got to that kitchen, to that moment, to that boy who stopped seeing his grandmother and started seeing a bank account with wrinkled hands. My name is Beatrice Callahan, and I'm 78 years old. I've lived in this same modest house since 1968, when my husband Elias and I signed the papers with trembling hands, so proud and terrified all at once. We were young then, full of dreams that didn't cost much, just a safe roof, warm meals, and maybe someday enough saved up to take a real vacation, though we never did get around to that. Elias worked at the factory for 42 years, and I took in sewing from home, mending clothes and making curtains for neighbors who paid in cash or casseroles or sometimes just kindness. We didn't have much flash, as Elias used to say. No new cars every few years, no fancy dinners out, no vacations to places we couldn't pronounce. But we had something better. We had discipline, quiet and steady as a heartbeat. Every week, Elias would sit at this very kitchen table with his old ledger, the one with the worn brown cover and his careful handwriting marking every overtime shift, every bonus, every penny we tucked away. Over 50 years, those pennies grew into something substantial. $420,000 to be exact. Enough to live comfortably in my final years, enough to leave something behind for family, enough to prove that two ordinary people could build something extraordinary through nothing but patience and love. Tyler came into my life when he was just 3 years old, after my daughter Margaret passed. Cancer, quick and cruel, took her before she turned 30. His father couldn't handle raising a boy alone. He tried, I'll give him that, but grief had hollowed him out. So Tyler spent most of his childhood here, in this house, sleeping in the room that used to be Margaret's. I raised him like he was mine. I paid for his braces when his teeth came in crooked, bought him his first car when he turned 16. Nothing fancy, just a reliable Honda that would get him where he needed to go. I covered his college application fees, helped him with homework at this kitchen table, taught him how to make Elias's favorite meatloaf. He called me Graham with such affection, such warmth in his voice. He'd throw his arms around me when he came over, plant a kiss on my cheek, tell me I was the best grandmother in the world. I believed him. God help me, I believed every word. The warning signs were there, looking back now with clear eyes. They always are, aren't they? Little things I explained away because love makes you blind, or maybe just hopeful. He started calling less frequently after he graduated college and got his first real job. When he did visit, his eyes would wander around the house like he was appraising it, noting the old furniture Elias and I had kept for decades because it still worked just fine. He'd make comments, casual throwaway little remarks, about how I didn't need such a big house for just one person, how I should think about downsizing, how the neighborhood was up and coming, which I later learned meant expensive. Then came Brooke. Tyler brought her to Sunday dinner about 6 months before Thanksgiving, and she was polished in a way that made me feel suddenly aware of my age spots and my outdated floral dress. She worked in real estate, she told me with a bright smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She and Tyler were getting serious, thinking about their future, looking at properties. She asked pointed questions about the house. When had we bought it? What had we paid? What it might be worth now? Tyler jumped in eagerly, telling her about Graham's nest egg. Like it was a family treasure we all shared instead of the result of my and Elias's sacrifice. I felt uneasy after that dinner, but I pushed it down. Young people talk about money differently now, I told myself. It doesn't mean anything. He's just excited about his future. He's not calculating, not scheming. He's my Tyler, my golden boy. Thanksgiving last year, that's when everything changed. That's when the boy I loved showed me exactly who he'd become. I'd spent 2 days cooking like I always did. Turkey and stuffing, sweet potato casserole, green bean almondine, 3 kinds of pie. The house smelled like every good memory I had, like every Thanksgiving Elias and I had hosted together before he passed. Tyler arrived with Brooke, both dressed like they were going somewhere important afterward, somewhere that mattered more than my dining room table. Dinner was strained. Brooke kept checking her phone. Tyler barely touched my cooking, said he was watching his carbs. They whispered to each other while I carved the turkey, and I pretended not to notice, pretended my hands weren't shaking just a little as I arranged the plates. After dessert, after the others had moved into the living room, Tyler's father and his new wife, my sister Dorothy and her husband, Tyler touched my elbow and nodded toward the kitchen. "Graham, can we talk for a minute?" My heart actually lifted. Foolish old woman that I was, I thought maybe he wanted to tell me something special. Maybe an engagement announcement, maybe he needed advice. I followed him into the kitchen, wiping my hands on my apron, smiling. He closed the door behind us. The sound of it clicking shut felt final somehow. "Graham," he said, and his voice was low, practical, like he was about to discuss a business transaction. "You're sitting on all that cash." I blinked at him, not understanding. "The money you and Grandpa Elias saved. 400,000, right? You're too old to need it now." He said it so matter-of-factly, like it was obvious, like I should have already come to this conclusion myself. "Brooke and I are thinking about buying a house. You could just transfer some over. It's not like you're gonna live forever." The words hit me like a physical blow. I actually stepped backward, my hip bumping against the counter. For a moment I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything but stare at this young man who looked like my grandson but sounded like a stranger. Too old for my own money. Not gonna live forever. He was calculating my expiration date. Standing in my kitchen, eating my food, wearing the watch I'd given him for his graduation, and telling me to my face that I was too old to deserve what I'd spent a lifetime building. I felt something inside me go very still and very cold. I managed to smile at him somehow. It felt like my face might crack from the effort, like my skin had turned to porcelain and the slightest movement would shatter everything. "You think I'm too old for my own money?" I asked, and my voice sounded distant even to my own ears, like I was listening to someone else speak from very far away. Tyler shrugged. Actually shrugged, like we were discussing what to have for breakfast instead of whether my life had any value left. "I'm just saying, Graham. It would help the family. Help us get started. You'd be helping your family. Helping my family." The words rattled around in my head, hollow and strange. I thought about all the times I'd helped this family. Raising Tyler when his mother died, taking him to baseball practice twice a week for 6 years, sitting up with him through nightmares and stomach flus and heartbreaks. I thought about the sewing I'd done to earn extra money, my fingers aching by lamplight while Elias slept. Also, we could have something to pass down, something to leave behind that said we mattered, we were here, we built this. "I'll think about it," I heard myself say. Tyler's face brightened immediately, and that might have been the worst part, seeing how easily he believed I'd just handed over, how little resistance he'd expected. He kissed my cheek the same way he'd done 1,000 times before. But this time his lips felt cold against my skin. "Thanks, Graham. I knew you'd understand. You've always been so good to me." Then he was gone, back to the living room where Brooke was waiting, and I stood alone in my kitchen surrounded by dirty dishes and the ruins of everything I believed about love. I couldn't go back out there. I couldn't sit on the couch and make small talk and pretend my heart wasn't breaking into smaller and smaller pieces with each breath. I told them through the door that I was tired, that I needed to lie down, and I listened to them leave, the goodbyes, the sound of Tyler's voice saying he'd call me soon, the front door closing, the cars starting up and driving away into the November darkness. Then the silence came and it was absolute. I sat at the kitchen table until well past midnight. The turkey carcass still sat on the counter getting cold. The pies remained half-eaten. I didn't have the energy to clean, didn't have the energy to do anything but sit in Elias's chair and feel the emptiness of this house pressing down on me like a physical weight. I pulled out his old ledger, the brown leather one he'd kept for 50 years. My hands trembled as I opened it, seeing his careful handwriting documenting our life together. Every deposit, every sacrifice, every choice we'd made to build something that would last beyond us. Here was the week he worked double shifts so we could afford Margaret's school supplies. Here was the month I took in extra sewing when the furnace broke. Here was the year we didn't buy Christmas presents for each other because we were saving for Tyler's braces. Tyler's braces. I actually laughed, a bitter sound that scared me coming from my own throat. The tears came then, finally hot and angry and full of a grief I hadn't felt since Elias died. I cried for the boy Tyler used to be, the one who'd loved me without calculation. I cried for my daughter Margaret, who would have been horrified at what her son had become. I cried for Elias, who'd worked himself to exhaustion believing we were building something meaningful. And I cried for myself, for the foolish old woman who'd loved too freely and trusted too completely. But somewhere in those tears, something else began to grow. Something harder and clearer than grief. I thought about what Tyler had said. "You're too old to need it now." As if age had erased my worth. As if reaching 78 meant I no longer deserved autonomy or dignity, or the right to decide what happened to my own life's work. As if I was already gone, already just an obstacle between him and his inheritance. I thought about Elias, about what he would say if he were sitting here beside me. Elias had always been gentle, but he'd had a backbone of steel when it came to principle. He'd believed that what we did with what we had defined who we were. Not the having itself, the doing. The money wasn't the legacy, I realized as the night stretched toward dawn. Elias and I had never been about the money. We'd been about the discipline, the partnership, the quiet choices to put something good into the world. We donated to St. Mary's Orphanage every year for 40 years. Not large amounts but faithful ones, because Elias had grown up in foster care and he'd never forgotten what it meant to need help. That's when I knew what I had to do. The decision didn't come with fanfare or drama. It came quietly, settling into my bones like certainty, like the feeling you get when you finally stop fighting against something and just accept the truth. Tyler didn't want a grandmother. He wanted an inheritance. And I couldn't control what he wanted, but I could absolutely control what I chose to do with what was mine. I would give the money away. Not to punish Tyler, though I won't pretend that wasn't part of it, but because that's what it had always been meant for. To help. To matter. To do something good in this world before I left it. When the sun rose on Friday morning, I was still sitting at that table, Elias's ledger open in front of me, my tears long dried. I picked up the phone and called Mr. Patel, the lawyer who'd handled our affairs for 30 years. "Mr. Patel," I said, my voice steady and calm and absolutely certain. "I need to make some changes to my estate. Can you come by today?" Mr. Patel arrived at my door that Friday afternoon carrying his worn leather briefcase, the same one he'd brought when Elias and I first made our wills 20 years ago. He's a kind man, Mr. Patel, with gentle eyes behind his wire-rimmed glasses and a way of listening that makes you feel heard. He sat across from me at the kitchen table, the same spot where Tyler had stood just hours before, and he didn't interrupt once while I told him everything. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he asked, "Beatrice, are you absolutely certain about this? It's a significant decision." I looked at him directly, and I realized my hands weren't shaking anymore. I've never been more certain of anything in my life. We spent the next 3 hours going over details. I wanted to liquidate $380,000 from my savings and establish an irrevocable gift to St. Mary's Orphanage. The remaining $40,000 would stay in my account for my own needs. More than enough for a woman who'd lived frugally her entire life. Mr. Patel explained carefully that once I signed the papers I couldn't change my mind, couldn't take it back even if I wanted to. I told him that was exactly the point. "There's one more thing," I said as he was packing up his briefcase. "I want to make the donation public. I want a small ceremony at the orphanage, with the local press invited. I want it documented." Mr. Patel's eyebrows rose slightly. "That's unusual for you, Beatrice. You and Elias always prefer to give quietly. This time is different," I said, and left it at that. He arranged everything for the following Saturday. 1 week. That's all the time between Tyler's words in my kitchen and the moment that would change everything. During that week, I moved through my days in a strange state of calm. I cleaned the house thoroughly, packed away the Thanksgiving leftovers, sewed a new quilt for the orphanage. I felt lighter somehow, like I'd been carrying a weight I didn't even know was there and had finally set it down. Tyler called twice during that week. The first time, he asked cheerfully if I'd thought about what we discussed. I told him yes, I had, and that I'd have an answer for him soon. The second time, he mentioned that he and Brooke had found the perfect house, that they just needed help with the down payment, that it would mean so much to have his Gram be part of this next chapter of their lives. I listened to him talk about square footage and good school districts and investment potential, and I felt nothing but a distant sadness for the boy he could have been. Come to St. Mary's Orphanage on Saturday at 2 o'clock, I told him before we hung up. Important family matter. Don't be late. I could hear the excitement in his voice when he agreed. He thought I was going to hand him a check. He actually thought that's what this was about. Saturday morning, I woke early and dressed carefully. My best navy blue dress, the pearl earrings Elias had given me for our 40th anniversary, my good shoes that I usually saved for church. I looked at myself in the mirror and saw an old woman, yes, but not a powerless one. Not anymore. The orphanage director, Sister Catherine, had helped arrange everything. She'd been stunned when Mr. Patel first contacted her, had actually cried on the phone when she understood the size of the donation. Mrs. Callahan, she'd said, her voice breaking, this will change everything for these children. Everything. That's what I wanted. Not revenge, not really. Just to know that what Elias and I had built would go on mattering, would keep helping long after I was gone. I arrived at St. Mary's at 1:30. The courtyard had been set up with a small podium and chairs. A reporter from the local newspaper was there, camera ready. The children from the orphanage were gathered in a group, scrubbed clean and curious, holding handmade thank you cards they'd created when Sister Catherine told them about the donation. One little girl, maybe 7 years old with dark braids and solemn eyes, came up and hugged my legs without saying a word. I felt tears prick my eyes, but I blinked them back. At 2 o'clock exactly, I heard a car engine. Tyler's leased SUV. The expensive one he'd bought last year. The one that probably cost more per month than my entire mortgage payment. Pulled into the parking lot. He got out with Brooke beside him, both of them dressed nicely, both of them smiling. They thought they were here for a gift. They thought this was about them. Tyler walked toward me, arms open for a hug, and I stepped back slightly. Something in my face must have registered because his smile faltered just a little. Graham? What's going on? You'll see, I said quietly. Sister Catherine stepped to the podium. The reporter raised his camera. The children arranged themselves behind me, their small hands holding their cards. And Tyler's face. Oh, his face in that moment shifted from confusion to dawning realization to something close to panic. Sister Catherine's voice rang out clear and strong across the courtyard. Today we are gathered to celebrate an extraordinary act of generosity. Mrs. Beatrice Callahan has donated $380,000 to St. Mary's Orphanage to expand our after-school program, provide college scholarships, and build a new library wing, which will be named in memory of her late husband, Elias Callahan. The children cheered. The camera flashed. And Tyler's face went completely, utterly white. I watched Tyler's face drain of color like water flowing out of a glass, and I felt something I hadn't expected. Not satisfaction exactly, but a quiet sense of rightness, like watching a balance finally tip back to center after years of being weighted wrong. Brooke's hand flew to her mouth, her perfectly manicured nails bright red against her pale skin. She looked at Tyler, then at me, then back at the podium where Sister Catherine was still speaking, her voice warm with gratitude that filled the courtyard like sunlight. The children were clapping now, their small hands making soft sounds that somehow felt enormous. One little boy, maybe 5 years old, broke away from the group and ran to me with a card that had a crayon drawing of a house and the words, "Thank you," written in wobbly letters. I took it with trembling hands and knelt down, my old knees protesting, to look him in the eyes. "You're very welcome, sweetheart," I whispered, and he threw his arms around my neck with the unself-conscious affection that only children have, the kind that Tyler used to give me before he learned to calculate the cost of love. When I stood back up, Tyler had moved closer. His mouth was opening and closing like a fish pulled from water, trying to find words that wouldn't come. The reporter was taking pictures now, of Sister Catherine, of the children, of me standing with that precious crayon card in my hands. I knew those pictures would run in Monday's paper. I'd made sure of it. "Graham," Tyler finally managed, his voice barely above a whisper. What is this?" I walked over to him slowly, and I saw him properly for the first time in months, maybe years. This young man with his expensive haircut and his leather shoes, and his girlfriend who looked like she might be sick right there in the orphanage courtyard. This stranger wearing my grandson's face. I'd prepared something for him, something physical he could hold, because I needed him to understand. I reached into my purse and pulled out a photograph, the one of me and Elias on our wedding day in 1967. We were so young in that picture, barely 25, standing in front of the courthouse in our best clothes. Elias wore his father's suit, altered to fit. I wore a simple white dress my mother had sewn. We were holding hands and smiling at the camera with such hope, such innocent faith that love and hard work would be enough to build a good life. On the back of that photograph, in Elias's handwriting from 50 years ago, were the words, "First day of our savings account, $47.50. Every penny counts." I handed it to Tyler. He took it automatically, looked at the front, then turned it over and read those words. His hands were shaking. "This is what the money was for," I said quietly, and my voice was steady even though my heart was pounding. "Not for a down payment on someone else's dream. Not to make your life easier while you tell me I'm too old to deserve my own security. It was for this, for children who need help, for the memory of a man who believed every person deserves dignity, for continuing something good in this world." Tyler's face had gone from white to red now, flushed with what I thought might be shame but could just as easily have been anger. "Graham, I didn't mean it like that. You don't understand." "I understand perfectly," I interrupted, and there was steel in my voice that surprised even me. "You meant exactly what you said. You looked at me and saw an expiration date. You calculated my remaining years and decided I didn't need my own money because I wasn't going to live forever. You said it to my face, Tyler. In my kitchen. After eating my food at my table in my house." Brooke tugged at Tyler's sleeve, urgent and sharp. "Tyler, we should go," she hissed, and I could see in her eyes that she understood this was a disaster, that whatever she'd been hoping for, whatever plans they'd made together, whatever future they'd built on the assumption of my money, had just evaporated like morning dew. But I wasn't finished. I pulled out one more thing from my purse, a single sheet of paper that Mr. Patel had prepared for me. It was a statement showing the transaction, official and legal and irreversible. I held it where Tyler could see it. "This is a copy of the donation agreement. Irrevocable means I can't change my mind, Tyler. Even if I wanted to, which I don't, I couldn't take this back. The money is gone. It's been transferred. It's going to do good in this world, the way it was always meant to." Tyler took the paper with nerveless fingers. He stared at it like he couldn't quite process what he was seeing. I watched his eyes move over the numbers, watched him do the math, watched him realize that $380,000 had just disappeared from what he'd clearly been counting as his inheritance. "You kept $40,000, he said finally, and his voice sounded strange, hollow. "You kept some." "For myself," I said firmly. "For my own needs, for however many years I have left. Which is more than enough because unlike some people, I know how to live within my means." The reporter was approaching now, probably wanting to interview me to get quotes for his story. I saw Tyler notice this, saw panic flash across his face as he realized this was going to be public, that people would know that somehow, even though his name wouldn't be in the paper, this would follow him. Sister Catherine had come to stand beside me, her hand gentle on my shoulder. "Mrs. Callahan, the children wanted to show you the room where the library will be built. Would you like to come see?" I looked at Tyler one more time. "Trust is earned slowly," I said quietly. "Remember that." Then I turned away and walked toward the children, toward the future I'd chosen, and I didn't look back to see if he was still standing there. The weeks after the donation ceremony passed in a strange, gentle rhythm that felt like waking up from a long sleep. I'd expected anger, maybe hot and sharp and consuming. I'd expected regret to come knocking at my door in the middle of the night, whispering that I'd been foolish, that I'd thrown away my security, that I'd burned a bridge I could never rebuild. But none of that came. Instead, I felt lighter than I had in years, like I'd been carrying a burden I didn't even know was there until I finally set it down. The local paper ran the story on Monday, just as I'd known they would. The headline read, "Local widow's $380,000 gift to transform St. Mary's Orphanage." There was a beautiful photograph of me surrounded by the children, all of us smiling, and another of the plaque that would go on the library wing, "In loving memory of Elias Callahan, who believed every child deserves a story." I cut out that article and put it in the old brown ledger, right next to Elias's careful notations from 1967. It felt like closing a circle that had been open too long. Tyler didn't call for 3 weeks. His silence was its own kind of communication, I suppose, a statement that he was either too angry or too ashamed to face me, and I wasn't sure which would have been worse. His father called once, awkward and fumbling, saying he'd heard about the donation and thought it was very generous, but also wondering if maybe I'd been a bit hasty. I told him gently that I'd never been more certain of anything in my life, and we left it at that. But the orphanage became a kind of sanctuary for me in those weeks. Sister Catherine called me a few days after the ceremony and asked if I might like to come volunteer, help with the children's reading program. I said yes before she'd even finished asking. So every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon, I drove my old sedan to St. Mary's and read stories to children who curled up beside me on worn sofas, their small bodies warm and trusting in a way that made my heart ache with something that wasn't quite sadness but wasn't quite joy either. Something in between, something that felt like healing. There was one little girl named Maya, 7 years old with dark eyes that seemed too old for her face. She'd come to St. Mary's after her mother died and her father couldn't be found, and she barely spoke to anyone. But she'd sit next to me during story time, her shoulder pressed against mine, and after a few weeks she started bringing me pictures she'd drawn, flowers and houses and families holding hands. I kept every single one, tucked them into a box at home that I looked at on difficult days. One Thursday afternoon, Maya climbed into my lap while I was reading Charlotte's Web, something I hadn't expected and hadn't realized I needed. Her weight was slight but real, and when she put her thumb in her mouth and leaned her head against my chest, I felt tears slip down my cheeks that had nothing to do with sadness. This, I thought, this is what the money was for. Not houses or cars or investments, but this, a child feeling safe enough to rest. My sister Dorothy came to visit on a Saturday morning in December, letting herself in with the key I'd given her years ago. She found me at the kitchen table working on a quilt, a new one for Maya, with bright colors and a pattern of stars. Dorothy made us tea without asking and sat down across from me with that look on her face that meant she had something to say but wasn't sure how to say it. "I heard Tyler finally called you," she said carefully, stirring sugar into her cup. "He did," I confirmed, not looking up from my stitching. "Last Tuesday." Tyler's call had been brief and stilted, his voice small in a way I hadn't heard since he was a child calling to apologize for breaking a lamp. "Graham," he'd said, "I'm sorry. I was wrong. I was selfish and cruel and I'm sorry." I told him that sorry was a start, that I accepted his apology, but that trust would take time to rebuild. He'd asked if we could have coffee sometime and I'd said maybe eventually when I was ready. The call had lasted less than 5 minutes, and when I hung up I'd felt neither satisfaction nor anger, just a quiet acknowledgement that some things, once broken, take a very long time to mend if they mend at all. "Are you going to forgive him?" Dorothy asked now, and I could hear the worry in her voice. Worry for me, worry about family fracturing beyond repair. I set down my needle and looked at her. This sister who'd known me for 78 years, who'd held my hand at Elias's funeral and sat with me through Margaret's death. "I already have forgiven him in a way," I said slowly, working out the words as I spoke them. "But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting what happened, and it doesn't mean going back to the way things were. He showed me who he is, Dorothy, or who he'd become, and I can love him and forgive him and still choose to protect myself." Dorothy reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You're stronger than I gave you credit for, B." That night, alone in my house with the quilt spread across my lap and the radio playing softly, I thought about strength. For so long I believed that strength meant sacrifice. Giving and giving and giving until there was nothing left, until you'd poured yourself out completely for the people you loved. But maybe real strength was knowing when to stop pouring, when to say this is mine and I'm keeping it, when to choose yourself even when it disappointed others. I looked around my small living room, the same furniture Elias and I had bought decades ago, the photographs on the walls, the quiet piece of a space that was wholly mine. I had $40,000 in the bank, enough for my simple needs. I had my health mostly. I had my volunteer work and my sewing and my sister and the children at St. Mary's who were becoming something like chosen family. Spring came to my neighborhood the way it always does, slowly at first, then all at once in a riot of color that makes you remember why winter is worth enduring. The tulips I'd planted with Elias 40 years ago came up again in the front garden, faithful as sunrise, and I spent a warm April morning on my knees in the dirt, pulling weeds and talking to him the way I still sometimes did when I was alone. "You'd be proud of me," I told the tulips, told his memory, told the wind. Or maybe you'd think I was foolish. I'm not always sure which. But that wasn't quite true anymore. I was sure. The certainty had grown in me like those tulips, pushing up through hard ground until it bloomed into something I could finally see clearly. The library wing at St. Mary's had its grand opening on a Saturday in May, 6 months after that Thanksgiving dinner that had changed everything. Sister Catherine insisted I be there to cut the ribbon, and I wore my good navy dress again, the same one from the donation ceremony, because it felt right to honor the moment properly. The children performed a song they'd learned specially, something about books and dreams and futures, and I stood there with tears streaming down my face while they sang, not even trying to hide them anymore. The plaque was mounted on the wall near the entrance, brass and gleaming. The Elias Callahan Memorial Library, in loving memory of a man who believed every child deserves a story. Below that, in smaller letters, donated by Beatrice Callahan 2025. My name and his together one more time, doing something that mattered. Maya found me afterward, tugging on my sleeve with the shy persistence she developed over our months of reading together. She was holding a book, The Secret Garden, and she looked up at me with those two old eyes that had started to look a little younger lately, a little more like they belonged to a 7-year-old child. "Will you read it to me?" she asked, and I said yes, of course yes, always yes. We sat in the new library, in a reading corner with cushions and good light streaming through the windows, and I read to her about Mary Lennox finding the hidden garden and bringing it back to life. Maya's head rested against my shoulder, and I thought about gardens and second chances and things that grow back even after you think they're dead forever. Tyler came to see me 3 weeks after the library opening. He called first this time, asked if he could visit, and I said yes because enough time had passed that I felt ready to see him without the sharp edge of betrayal cutting into every breath. He came alone, no Brooke, which I learned later was because she'd broken up with him shortly after the donation ceremony, had decided that a man whose grandmother didn't trust him with money wasn't worth her time. I felt a moment of vindication at that, small and petty and human, before letting it go. We sat in the living room, tea between us on the coffee table that Elias had built with his own hands. Tyler looked older somehow, or maybe just more real, less polished, more uncertain, like life had roughed up his edges in a way that might actually be good for him. "I saw the article about the library opening," he said quietly. "It looked beautiful." "It is," I said simply. He was quiet for a long moment, turning his teacup in circles on its saucer. "I've been thinking a lot about what I said to you, about what I did, and I wanted you to know that I understand now why you did what you did. I was treating you like you didn't matter, like you were just an obstacle, like your life was already over and I was just waiting for my turn." I looked at this young man, this boy I'd raised, and I saw something in his face that looked like genuine remorse. Not just regret at losing the money, but real understanding of the pain he'd caused. "Maybe. I hope so anyway." "Tyler," I said gently, "I need you to understand something. I didn't give that money away to punish you, though I won't pretend that wasn't part of it. I gave it away because it was right. Because that's what it was always meant for, helping people who actually need it. Your grandfather and I, we didn't save for 50 years just so someone could buy a bigger house or a nicer car. We saved because we believed in building something that mattered." "I know," he said, and his voice cracked. "I know that now. And I'm sorry, Graham. I'm so sorry for making you feel like you didn't matter, like you were just in the way." I reached across and took his hand, this hand I'd held when it was small enough to wrap around my finger. "I forgive you, Tyler. But things are different now. They have to be." We talked for an hour, carefully building something new from the ruins of what had broken. It wasn't the same as before, it would never be the same, but maybe it could be something else, something more honest and less presumptuous. When he left, he hugged me at the door, and this time I hugged him back without reservation. After he drove away, I walked through my quiet house, this place that had held 58 years of my life. I thought about Elias and Margaret and all the people I'd loved and lost. I thought about the children at St. Mary's and the library that would serve them for generations. I thought about Tyler and forgiveness and the complicated mathematics of family. And I realized something. I was 78 years old and I had finally learned the most important lesson of all, that loving people didn't mean disappearing for them, that generosity didn't require self-erasure, that I could give everything away and still somehow have more than I'd ever had before. Not money. Something better. Peace. The evening light slanted through my kitchen windows, golden and warm, catching the dust motes in the air like tiny stars. I sat at Elias's table with his old ledger open in front of me, and on the last page in my own careful handwriting I wrote, April 2026. Final balance enough. More than enough. Everything that matters. Then I closed the book, made myself a simple dinner, and sat on my porch to watch the sunset paint my neighborhood in shades of amber and rose. Somewhere in the distance, children were laughing. Spring flowers were blooming in gardens up and down the street. The world was turning the way it always had, indifferent and beautiful and full of possibilities. And I was here to see it, not too old for anything, not too old at all. Just exactly old enough to finally understand what freedom means. Not having everything but needing very little. Not being loved by everyone, but being true to yourself. Not living forever but making sure the time you have counts for something real. I rocked slowly in my chair, and I smiled, and I felt Elias beside me in the way he'd always be. In the sunset we'd watched together 1,000 times, in the house we'd built, in the choices we'd made that kept echoing forward like ripples in still water. We did good, didn't we? I whispered to him, to the evening, to myself. And somewhere in the peace of that spring twilight, I heard the answer yes. Yes, you did.